So, what do? And just like that, you're trapped, and they're waiting for your answer. You know the script. Share your job title, ask about theirs, comment on the weather, laugh politely at nothing funny, ask how their weekend was, pretend to care about traffic, and the entire time there's this voice in your head screaming, "This is torture." We're saying nothing. We're performing connection without actually connecting. Can we please talk about something real, or can I just leave? If you've ever felt this way, you don't hate people. You hate the performance of shallow conversation that passes for human connection. Here's what psychology actually says about people who can't stand small talk. And I'm not talking about social anxiety or shyness, though those can coexist. I'm talking about people who are perfectly capable of conversation, but find surface-level chit-chat genuinely painful. Researchers call this low tolerance for superficial interaction, and it's strongly correlated with personality traits like openness to experience, need for cognition, and what psychologists call intellectual depth-seeking. Dr. Matthias Mell's research at the University of Arizona found something remarkable. People who engage primarily in substantive conversations report significantly higher well-being than those who engage primarily in small talk. His study tracked conversations and found that the happiest participants had twice as many deep conversations and one-third the amount of small talk compared to unhappiest participants. But here's the critical finding. It wasn't that these people had more total conversations. They had fewer conversations, but those conversations went somewhere meaningful. Quality over quantity wasn't just a preference. It was measurably correlated with life satisfaction. You're not antisocial for hating small talk. You're psychologically wired to crave depth, and shallow interaction literally doesn't satisfy your brain's need for meaningful exchange. The cognitive waste problem. Here's what happens in your brain during small talk that makes it feel so exhausting. You're expending cognitive energy without gaining cognitive reward. Every conversation requires mental resources. You're processing language, reading social cues, formulating responses, managing impressions. That's expansive for your brain. Normally, you're compensated for that expense with information, insight, connection, or learning something new. Small talk offers none of those rewards. You already know the weather is bad. You don't actually care how someone's weekend was if you don't know them well enough to care about the real answer. The exchange is purely performative social lubrication with no substance. Research from Dr. Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago found that people consistently underestimate how much they'll enjoy deep conversations with strangers and overestimate the awkwardness. We default to small talk not because it's better, but because we assume others prefer it. But for depth-seeking brains, small talk feels like running an intensive program that produces no output. It's cognitive expense without cognitive return, and your brain registers this as waste, the authenticity gap. Let's talk about why small talk feels so fake, because it is. Sociologist Irving Goffman described this as front stage versus backstage behavior. Small talk exists entirely in the front stage of the performative social self you present to the world. You're not sharing your actual thoughts, feelings, or experiences. You're performing the socially acceptable version of interaction. How are you? Good. And how are you? Neither person is actually answering. You're not good, you're tired, worried about something, excited about a project, frustrated with a situation. But good is the script. The real answer isn't welcome in small talk. For people who crave authenticity, this exchange feels like lying. Not malicious lying, but low-grade dishonesty that creates cognitive dissonance. You're saying words that don't match your internal reality, and your brain knows it. Dr. Laura King's research on authenticity and well-being found that people who report higher levels of authentic self-expression in daily interactions show better mental health outcomes, greater life satisfaction, and lower stress. Small talk is literally the opposite of authentic self-expression. When you say you hate small talk, what you're really saying is, I hate performing a version of myself that doesn't exist for the comfort of someone I don't actually know. The question quality problem. Here's something small talk haters understand intuitively. Not all questions are equal, and most small talk questions are terrible. How was your weekend? What do you do? How about this weather? These aren't real questions. They're social placeholders, sounds you make to fill silence and signal that you're following social protocol. Real questions create openings. They invite genuine thought. They assume the other person has something interesting to say. What's something you're genuinely excited about right now? What's a problem you're trying to solve? What's changed the way you think recently? Research on conversation quality by Harvard psychologist Allison Wood Brooks found that people who ask follow-up questions are rated as more likable and learn more information. But small talk doesn't allow follow-up questions because the initial questions don't invite real answers. You don't hate conversation. You hate questions that assume you have nothing interesting to say and nothing interesting to hear in return. You hate the insulting shallowness of exchanges that treat human beings as interchangeable social units rather than complex individuals. The energy economics, here's the math that small talk haters understand. Social energy is limited and you're not going to waste it on nothing. Dr. Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion showed that self-regulation, including the kind required for polite small talk, uses up a finite resource. Every minute you spend performing pleasantness and surface conversation is energy you can't spend on something that actually matters to you. Introverts and highly sensitive people feel this particularly acutely because their social energy depletes faster. But even extroverts who hate small talk are doing this calculation. Is this interaction worth the energy I'm spending on it? And when the answer is consistently no, you start avoiding situations where small talk is required. You skip the networking event. You take the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid 30 seconds of forced weather chat. You keep your headphones in at coffee shops. People think you're antisocial. Actually, you're economically efficient with a limited resource. You'd rather have one meaningful conversation than 10 meaningless ones, not because you're snobby, but because that's how you preserve energy for things that actually replenish you. The cultural script problem, here's why this is so hard. Western culture treats small talk as a moral requirement. If you don't engage in it, you're considered cold, unfriendly, antisocial, or weird. The person who can effortlessly chat about nothing for 20 minutes is praised as having good people skills. The person who says, "I don't really enjoy small talk," is seen as problematic. But research across cultures shows this isn't universal. In many cultures, silence between people who don't know each other well is perfectly acceptable. The assumption that you must fill every gap in conversation with pleasant nothings is culturally specific and culturally enforced. Psychologist Susan Cain documents this extensively. American culture has a particularly strong bias toward gregarious extroversion. Being able to work a room with superficial charm is treated as more valuable than the ability to have one substantive conversation. This creates a specific kind of psychological pressure for small talk haters. You're not just navigating your own preferences, you are fighting a cultural expectation that your preference is wrong.